There we go. So today we're going to go through 2 Kings. If you've been here before, or if you've been paying attention online, we've been going through the Old Testament, looking at how each book of the Bible kind of points forward to Jesus. And we've gone through now the past few weeks, excepting Easter, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and now 2 Kings. And they're all really, when you think about it, one big narrative. In fact, before we broke the Bible out into books, Kings was just Kings. There was one scroll. There wasn't 1 and 2. Same thing with Samuel. It was just the scroll of the book of Samuel. And in a lot of ways, 2 Kings gets kind of short shrift because, wrong one. In a lot of ways, Elisha, it's about Elisha. And Elisha's kind of like the younger brother of Elijah. And as a younger brother myself, we know the younger brother's better. But the older brother gets more attention. And so, in a lot of ways, we're going to see that dynamic at least looked at. But as I was saying, this is really episode 4, and there's your Star Wars reference, of the entire story. And the distinction, or the division between 1st and 2nd Kings is basically arbitrary. 1 Kings ends with Ahab and Jehoshaphat, and they die. And, okay, they're dead, new book. That's really kind of what it is. In fact, we have one last Elijah story in 1 Kings. And in a lot of ways, the themes of both of these, I'm going to kind of dance back into 1 Kings a couple of times, is about the kings as covenant keepers. There are some kings who historically are very important, and they get like no mention. And there's kings who historically did almost nothing, and they're talked about quite a bit. So for example, the king Omri, he gets exactly 6 verses in 2 Kings, and he actually is one of the ones we have a historical attestation of. King, tiny little country, he actually shows up. He's important enough in history. He only gets 6 verses in 2 Kings. It's kind of like someone talking about Millard Fillmore. How many of you know who Millard Fillmore is? Okay, that's actually more I thought it'd be. He was the president who opened up Japan. So Commodore Perry, 4 black dragons, the 4 warships that go in Tokyo Bay and say, hi, we have cannons, negotiate with us. Unless you know about that, you kind of don't know anything about Millard Fillmore. Same deal here with Omri. But we're going to talk about what happened actually in these I'm running slow today, I apologize. So chapters 1 through 8, we talk about the ministries of Elisha and those other people. And we start off with Elijah. Elijah, his last story talks about King Ahaziah is sick, and he sends messengers to Baal, to the priests of Baal, to see if he's going to get better. And Elijah intercepts the messenger. So he never gets to talk to Baal. He talks to God's prophet instead. And so Ahaziah keeps sending these groups of 50 guys to go see what happened. And Elijah fire comes down and destroys them until the third group, that captain, that officer, humbly requests, can Elijah go talk to the king so we don't get blown up again? And he does. And you start seeing how, don't bother going to Baal. That doesn't do you any good. Talk to God's prophet. Then after that, we have the passing of the ministry to Elisha. And it's kind of an interesting interaction. Elijah and Elisha, and they go to the Jordan River, and they have a bunch of prophets hanging out, kind of like maybe groupies, maybe acolytes. It kind of sounds like groupies to me, but maybe not. And they leave the prophets there. Elijah and Elisha go to the river. Elijah takes off his cloak, whaps the water with it, and it parts. And you walk across the Jordan River, and they go, and there's this question, you, Elisha, what do you want? Kind of like Solomon's question, what do you want as a king? What do you want as a prophet? And he asks for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. And Elijah says, okay, we can do that. And he does it. And then Elijah's taken away on a fiery chariot. And we just never see him again. And then we have kind of a reverse interaction. So Elisha takes Elijah's cloak. He walks back to the Jordan, whacks the water with it. It parts again, just like Elijah. He walks across the prophets. The prophets kind of acknowledge him as Elijah's, it's hard to say Elijah and Elisha in one sentence, acknowledge him as Elijah's successor. So he kind of has this reverse interaction. And really he gets to be like the next Elijah. And then he does a ton of miracles. In fact, more than Elijah's listed as having done. And there's just a bunch of them. So we get the deadly pot of stew, where a bunch of prophets, the prophets look kind of like idiots in this book, by the way. Prophets make some stew with unknown gourds. Let's just throw some stuff in there, see what happens. They start dying. Elisha throws some flour in the bowl, and it's good to eat. He parts the water. There's some water that's poisoned or bad to drink. He throws some salt in it. It's good to drink. There's a bunch of interactions with, like, the army needs water, and so he comes out and provides water to them. There's the prophet who's a widow who needs some money. She has to pay some debts off. So he's like, hey, do you have any oil? Anything at all in your house? I have a little tiny vial of oil. Get every neighbor, get every jar they have, bring it into your house. And she pours this tiny little vial of oil, and just like water to wine, just like feeding the 5,000, they all get filled up, just like Hanukkah. You get the Shunammite woman, who's this lady. She and her husband make a room for Elisha, where he has a place to stay, and her son, who's kind of miraculously provided, very Samuel-like, and Samson, he dies, and so Elisha goes in and kind of just lays down next to him and kind of breathes on him, kind of CPR. It's not a great descriptor of what exactly happened, but he lays against this child, and boy jumps up and he's alive. There's also the prophets need bread. The prophets, again, don't look that great. And he just makes bread, just like feeding the 5,000. And there's a situation where a bunch of Aramite soldiers come to capture him, and they're struck blind. They're just struck blind. And so he's like, hey, come with me. And he leads them into the middle of the capital of Israel, enemy territory, and has a conversation with the king about what to do with them. So a bunch of miracles, including probably the favorite one of mine, which is the bears. And Elisha's walking along, and unscrupulous, unruly teenagers, they're teenage boys, are running around, and they're like, hey, baldy, hey, bald guy. And what's going on here is really interesting. My dad is very bald. My dad, his forehead goes back to here. And so I was very interested in the story growing up. And what they're really kind of saying is baldness is very rare in Israel, and it's actually kind of considered to be a sign of impotence. And so what they're really saying is, hey, messenger of God, you're impotent. God's impotent, therefore. It's really this insult at God. He can't find somebody better than you. And so two mother bears just walk out of the woods and maul a bunch of these kids to death, which feels like an overreaction, but no, they're sitting there saying God has no power. God has no authority. God's picking like the 8th string, not even the 2nd string guy, the 8th string guy, because he can't get anything better. It's really an attack. And so, yeah, bad things happen. And just like back in Samuel's, with the Ark of the Covenant and the Philistines, and they put it on a cart, and these mother cows are pulling it, and they've never pulled a cart before, and they should be going back to their children, their calves, but no, they go straight for Israeli territory. These bears are acting completely abnormally, completely unnaturally to emphasize God's power. They should deal with the threat, if there was one, go back to their cubs. No, they pursue these boys. They are on a mission from God, literally take care of business. And so you have this really powerful set of miracles that are all about God's power and God taking care of people and God dealing with the prophets. It's really, really interesting. And again, it's a lot of different things. We also get the story of Naaman. Naaman is this guy. I also habitually spell Naaman wrong, so I have to keep looking at everything, make sure it's right. Naaman is a general in the Aramite army. The Aramites are another kingdom. They're a threat, and they actually attack Israel and Judah multiple times in 2 Kings. And he's a great warrior. He is a great general. He is kind of one of the reasons Aram is actually doing well. But he's not the king, he's a general. And he has leprosy, so he can't go out and lead necessarily because he has leprosy. And this slave girl, who's an Israelite, that serves his wife, says, why don't you go see the prophet in Samaria, who's Elisha, and he can help you. And so he takes about $11 million worth of gold and silver, 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and a letter to the king of Israel saying, can you heal Naaman? And Naaman himself carries it. The letter's from the king. And the Aramite king sends this letter because he thinks Elisha, God's prophet, serves the king, that God serves the king. And he completely ignores God in this. And he thinks that the money will buy a favor from God. The king of Israel, he tears his robes. He can't heal leprosy. He knows he can't. He thinks that this is an impossible demand. Heal my best general as a reason to cause a war. You didn't do what I asked you to do? Fine, we're going to invade you anyways because we want to. He completely ignores God. And then Elisha sends word, hey, send Naaman over. So Naaman goes to Elisha's house. And he goes there in his big chariot and his horses and his procession and his fine clothes. And he wants to look important, like a VIP who should be healed. You should pay attention to me and heal me. And Elisha doesn't even talk to him. He doesn't even look at him. He sends a servant out with a note saying, go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. So imagine you have a heart transplant. And it's starting to give out, so you need to have like serious surgery from the best doctor in the world. So you go to the best heart surgeon in the world. And the secretary, while she's on the phone, talking to her mom about this date on Sunday, just hands you a note, and you have to go to Walmart, and go to the pharmacy, but go to Walmart and get this aspirin. And don't get the brand name, get the generic, because the generic's better. That's kind of what Elisha did. And Naaman is hideously offended. Can't even talk to him, can't even look at him, sent him with a servant, and said to go wash in the filthy, muddy, nasty Jordan River 7 times. What on earth is this? Another servant, so again, the servants are talking to Naaman and correcting him, says, if he'd asked something crazy difficult, you'd have gone and done it. Why not just do something easy that you were asked to do? Okay, so he does. He washed himself in the Jordan River, and he is physically restored. Now, it says he has the skin of a young man. I interpret this as all the blemishes, all the leprosy, all the scars, all the nasty scrapes from being a soldier for however many years, all of that was gone. He was completely and utterly restored. He was reborn. And he then converts. He's going to worship only God, but he's like, oh, but I'm the guy who the king leans on when he goes to worship Baal. I think it's Baal, worship other gods. And when he goes in the temple and bows, I kind of got to go with him or fall down. So it's not a respect, it's my king doesn't fall down. And so he's still respecting his old vows. He's not going to just absolutely blow up all these vows he's made, turn himself into a liar. Other than that, he's going to completely honor God. And that's like a really big thing. And then we get this weird interlude where Elisha's servant Gehazi tricks Naaman into paying him, but really he's embezzling money. And he gets the leprosy. So we have this really interesting interaction. But we get Naaman who was going to do the hard thing, but couldn't even do the easy thing, even if it meant salvation. And then we come back and we get a bunch of these attacks from Aram. We get Aramites attacking. They go to try to capture Elisha because Elisha was helping the Israelites. And they send this giant army with horses and chariots who surround the city, and Elisha walks out, and the servant is afraid. It might be Gehazi, it might be somebody else. And Elisha prays that the servant's eyes are opened, and he sees horses and chariots of fire in all the hills, which sounds like Elijah, which sounds like Gideon. And those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That's from 2 Kings 6. So we get this really fun interaction with the servant and seeing the army. And then we get this interaction where Aramite's hard too for me for some reason, attacks Samaria, and there's a siege, and there's a famine because of it, and a donkey's heads are unclean, you shouldn't be eating them anyways, but is going for more than $2,000. They're eating bird droppings because there's seeds in it. They're so hungry. And the king of Israel blames Elisha, he's going to go kill him. And Elisha prophesies that the king of Israel is coming to kill me, bar the door before his servant even gets here. And there's some interaction with the siege going to be lifted. No, it's not. How could that happen? And so Elijah says to the guy who said, how could this even happen? Tomorrow, 7 quarts of flour will cost a penny. In other words, the siege will be lifted. But the soldier who doubted will see this miracle, but he won't live to enjoy it. And so the next day, there's 4 lepers at the city gate. And this is one of those military history moments I like to get into, where a lot of times if you're besieging a castle or besieging a city and you've got some weak or sick or old people who really won't be a benefit to besiegers, you drive them into the city if you're the attacker. Because there's 3 options. They get let in, at which point they're a drain on resources. They don't get let in, at which point they die horribly and painfully and morale-destroyingly just outside the city, or you're actually nice and you let them into your own camp. So it's not weird for there to be 4 lepers who got pushed just straight into the middle of everything. Hey, stay there and maybe they'll let you in, use up resources on you. And they decide they're going to just go back to the Aramite camp. They get killed. It's better than starving to death at the gate. And they go in and the Aramite camp is empty. And they loot the camp briefly. And then they go tell people, and the king thinks it's a trick. He thinks the Aramites are just waiting until the gates are opening up. So he sends some soldiers to spy out this retreating army. And they find out the Aramites heard the sound of chariots that night before from nowhere, near as everybody can tell. And so they just ran. And so the Israelites run out and they loot the entire Aramite camp. And 7 quarts of flour is going for a penny. But the mob rushing out to get to the camp tramples that soldier to death, the guy who had doubted. So that prophecy came true in a very, very dramatic way. And we also have Ben-Hadad and Hazael. I hope I'm saying that right. Ben-Hadad has been the king of Aram this whole time, or most of this time, and he's sick. So he sends Hazael, one of his generals, to Elisha to ask, is he going to get better? Is he going to recover from the sickness, or is the sickness going to be fatal? And Elisha gives the weirdest answer. He tells the messenger, Hazael, to tell Ben-Hadad he will recover. The illness will not be fatal. But then he tells Hazael not to tell Ben-Hadad he's going to die anyways. And then he weeps over the damage that Hazael is going to do the Israelites once he's king, is kind of the parenthetical there that no one says out loud. And so Hazael does it. He goes back, says, yes, Elisha said that you're going to get better. This sickness is not terminal. And then that night he strangles him and launches a coup. And we'll see Hazael over and over again through the rest of the book. But again, we have this very interesting interaction in the prophecy and things that happen directly and the power of God. Oh, sorry. And one of the things you need to see through all this is how Elisha is Elijah-y and how he isn't. In a lot of ways, Elijah reminds me of Paul. Elijah goes in and he is confrontational. He is dramatic. One thing I'll say about Paul loves a good argument. The more public, the better. The more threats to kill him or rend him limb from limb, he's just fired up. I mean, Paul is the guy who in the middle of a riot is like, hey, I'm going to go talk to them. It's crazy. But Elisha is more like John. Just as effective, just as godly, but a whole lot less confrontational, a whole lot more kind of task-focused. But either way, they're both preaching God's word, even when the culture and the king and the people are all against them. Also can see with the miracles that Elisha is very focused on people, on helping the people, poor, the widows, on helping the prophets, the oil, and he made an axe head float because they somehow dropped it in the river. And all these miracles tend to reflect on other parts of the covenant. We're getting to the end of the Old Testament narrative in time. And so this is kind of like the big finish musically. If you think about, let's say, a musical, and you have the last song in the first act before intermission, for everybody goes and use the bathroom, a lot of times you'll hit all the high points musically of every song that came before. And this happens too. We have oil like Hanukkah, which is mainly later. We have an Elijah-y raising the Shunammite son like he'd raised the widow's son. We have the Shunammite and her family actually escape the famine and come back, just like Ruth, just like Joseph and escaping to Egypt. Naaman, that points to Jesus too, healing lepers, feeding a 5,000-ish thing. A lot of times, Elisha will use a prop. He'll throw salt in water. He'll throw flour in a pot, just like Moses would do. Moses would hit something with a stick, and then the miracle would happen. So you have a lot of prop plus situation equals miracle. Elisha does that too. Parting the Jordan, very Moses, very Joshua, very Elijah. So it's all these themes kind of all coming together for the big finish, and then we're going to have intermission for about 400 years, and then we'll have Jesus. So that's coming in. All right. Chapters 8 through 17, we talk about the different kingdoms of Judah and Israel as they're moving into what will end up being Israel. Assyrians attacking Israel and taking it over. And there's a lot of kings. Their reigns overlap. You basically need a chart to keep track of it. The big thing to think about here is there's a lot of overlaps, a lot of co-rulerships. I'm king, my son is going to succeed me. I'll make him co-ruler once I get to a certain age, just so he knows what he's doing when the time comes. And the whole book is a little tiny bit out of order. So, for example, we have Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, who was made a leper in chapter 5, but he's telling the king all about Elisha's deeds, even though he's a leper, in chapter 8. So probably those times are switched. So there's a little bit of out of orderness going on in here. One other thing to notice, a lot of these kings are starting their reigns very young. So if you look, they're 22, they're 25. That's actually pretty young for that time period. You expect the king to survive to, say, 60s. You should be in your 30s, maybe 40s. But a lot of guys are dying early and are dying fast. A lot of these kings also will reign for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So very, very short reigns. A lot of bad things are happening. And the other thing is that as these get described, it's almost always, and such was king of Israel, king of Judah, and immediate description of how well they followed the covenant. They followed the way of Ahab, or they followed the way of God. And it ends up being mostly the bad ones. We also get this slow deterioration of the fortunes of the kingdoms. We had been at a real high point with David and Solomon, and like lands getting chipped away, famines, bad things. Edom rebels, Aram attacks. And a lot of times they're making bad decisions. Maybe if Ahab is so terrible that he's become he and Jezebel are a byword for evil, don't marry their daughter, because that's not a good choice, especially if you're the king of Judah and you broke away from that kingdom for a reason. So a lot of stuff like that happens. There's a lot of intermarrying, bad family going on. But what ends up happening is the kind of high points of Jehu. Jehu is the last bit of Elijah's commission. Way back in 1 Kings, God told Elijah to do 3 things. Anoint Hazael, king of Aram, anoint Jehu, king of Israel, and anoint Elisha to succeed him as a prophet. And what ends up happening is, we saw Elisha anoint Hazael. He actually will get better, but then kill him. And he then goes and he anoints Jehu. And obviously, Elijah had directly anointed him. This, again, he's the successor, the equal of Elijah. And so Elisha sends a prophet to go talk to Jehu. He's just a general. He's not even a king or a prince. Go into a private room, anoint him, tell him he's the king, and then you, prophet, run. Don't stop to close the door. If someone says hi or invites you to dinner, don't even answer. Just keep going. And he does. And he has a little bit from Elijah. He's quoting him about revenge on the house of Ahab and dogs licking up Jezebel's blood. We'll come back to that. And so Jehu comes out, and he's like, hey, I've been anointed as the king. They immediately throw cloaks, blow trumpets, yay, he's the king, and they launch the coup. And we have about a chapter and a half on just the mechanics of this coup, where Jehu jumps out and he runs in. He's on a chariot by himself. People join him. It's very Les Miserables, to go back to musicals. And then he shoots the king of Israel, Joram, with an arrow, and he dies at Naboth's vineyard, fulfilling a prophecy of Elijah. The king of Judah, Ahaziah, he's wounded. He eventually dies. And then they go to where Jezebel is, and she's thrown out of a window by her own servants, her own eunuchs. And the prophecy about her body being eaten by dogs, that gets fulfilled. And then Jehu purges the entire rest of the house of Ahab. Everyone who is a supporter, a soldier, a high-ranking servant, or a family member, they all get killed, including 70 heads get mailed to him, basically. And then he does it also he does the next thing is he says, okay, dear people of Israel, I've now destroyed the government. And Ahab, yeah, he served Baal a little bit. Jehu, I'm going to serve him a lot. Let's all have a big worship service for Baal. So they go out, they get all the priests, all the prophets of Baal. They go in to the temple of Baal, and Jehu offers a sacrifice. And they kick out all the God worshipers. And once they're like, hey, Jehu's one of us, nice, he's doing the deal, then his soldiers all run in and kill everybody. So he did this big thing about tricking the Baal prophets and Baal priests to kill all of them. And they desecrate the temple to Baal. They take out the special Baal stone, and they destroy it. They go into the Holy of Holies in the Baal temple and desecrate it. They take the entire temple and turn it into a latrine, which is hilarious and straight up one of those kind of God jokes. I've said before, I think God has a sense of humor, and this is one of the situations. Because Baal is a god of the harvest. He's a fertility god, as in crops. And how do you fertilize crops that time? With waste, with human waste or animal waste. So yeah, we're making his temple into a place to collect fertility stuff, which is hilarious. But it's also incredibly disrespectful, which is the point. It's a really, really well-planned coup. And Jehu is actually told by the prophet, because he has done well, his descendants will be on the throne to the 4th generation. But it was all political. He never really followed God. Yeah, he did God's stuff. He took care of Baal, took care of the priests, took care of Ahab and Jezebel, but he never really followed God. He still was a bad king in that range. We get Joash. Joash is the child of Ahaziah. Remember I mentioned Ahaziah got shot also when Jehu did his coup. He dies, and then his mother kills all of the other royal princes, his siblings and his children. Most of the other possibilities in the line of David have already been killed. And she kills everybody except for one. Joash is one, he's a baby. Him and his wet nurse are hidden in the temple by Ahaziah's sister, who's actually married the chief priest. And Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, rules in her own name, which doesn't make any sense because she's not of the line of David. She's some just random person as far as the line goes. Rules in her own name for 6 years, at which point the priest, I have his name somewhere. There's a ton of J names in here, and they disappear into the thing. Anyway, the chief priest calls in all the generals, says, here is Joash. Joash is Ahaziah's last surviving son. He's the rightful king. And they launch a coup. I'm going to say coup about 20 more times this morning because there's a ton of them. And the troops actually take shields and spears that are in the temple, probably war plunder that was dedicated by David, and they launch their counter coup. And Athaliah, she hears the commotion. She rushes to the temple and tries to rally her followers, and that ain't going to happen. She's a terrible queen. They hate her. She gets dragged out of the temple so they can shed her blood, not on temple grounds. They don't just desecrate the temple. And then this chief priest renews the covenant between the people and God. They tore down the Baal altars, tore down the Asherah poles. But Joash is like 6 or 7. He's a child. Actually, we had our 6.5-year-old nephew visiting us this week. And can you imagine a kindergartner running a country? So really, this was a priestly coup. This is the priests seizing power, not part of God's plan. And so it would be like if our nephew was the real king and Veronica and I decided that we were going to launch a coup and rule the country. Why? That's not the way it works. But Joash, he actually did well as a king. He was a good king. All the years this chief priest, his surrogate father, instructed him. And they tore down the Baal altars. They tore down the Asherah poles, but they didn't tear down the high places. And these were places where they were places to worship Yahweh God. So they were not idolatry, but they weren't the temple. They weren't doing it the right way. And they were avenues for idolatry to creep back in. So if I don't have to worship in the temple, well, then why do I have to worship? Why do I have to worship the God I'm supposed to? I don't have to worship the way I'm supposed to. And so it kind of just it's a way for idolatry to sneak in. And he tried to repair the temple, but after a certain amount of time, it wasn't happening. So it sounds like he finally took personal charge, threw the priests out, and as far as being in power, and they end up doing this thing to repair the temple. And you get this idea that this is a golden age. They don't even bother counting the money. The workmen are so honest, which is kind of nice. But at the end of his reign, Hazael, that guy, he attacks, and Joash bribes him. He takes all the precious articles, all the precious metal things from the temple, all of his money in his treasury, and pays off Hazael. And he ends up being assassinated. And actually, I think when we get to Chronicles, we'll see why he got assassinated. He definitely wasn't all right and good. And Hazael goes through, and he oppresses Israel and Judah quite a bit. We get some other things. And Elisha dies, finally, and he has one last prophecy that's basically baked into, you've got to be enthusiastic. He says to the king of Israel, take some arrows, strike the ground with them. Guy's like, all right, fine, whap, whap, whap. And he's genuinely upset. He's like, dude, you only hit the ground 3 times, you're only going to win 3 more times. If you'd tried, if you'd been enthusiastic about following God's command and struck the ground 5 or 6 times, you would have defeated Aram utterly. Because of that, no. And we end up getting the last miracle of Elisha after that. He dies, normally, gets put in a tomb, normally. About a year or so later, Aramites attack, and they're burying some random guy. And the Aramites attack, and they're like, oh, and they just throw the body in the nearest tomb, which happens to be Elisha's. And the dead body touches Elisha's bones, and he's resurrected. Not Elisha, just the dude, the random guy. Which is cool, but it makes 0 sense as far as anything other than pointing to resurrection can happen after death. Come back to that. But we do get this brief little moment for Israel where they get to fight back against Aram. They actually eventually conquer Damascus, Aram's capital, and they expand their territory. Despite all the sin, despite all the terrible things they'd done, they actually do pretty well. Judah is pretty lukewarm all throughout. And then we get Ahaz. Ahaz is the king of Judah. He is absolutely terrible. That's actually all my notes say is absolutely terrible. He literally sacrificed his son in the fire to Baal. He went to visit the kings of Assyria. Historically, at this time, Assyria, which had been affected by what's called the Bronze Age collapse, was becoming the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and they were becoming much stronger. We're about to come on the world stage. He goes to Assyria, sees an altar, and he's like, oh, he makes a drawing and sends it to the chief priests to build and put in the temple, which is a no-no. And so we see just how terrible he is. He's worshiping Baal. He's defiling the temple. And he does the dumbest possible thing. He asks Assyria to come in and help with a border dispute with Israel. The reason you would want to, say, marry Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, even though she's a terrible human because she's related to those people, is politically it's a great match. You want to reunite the kingdoms. You know, their king, your king, they marry, their child inherits both. That's politically a good idea. Asking the up-and-coming superpower that's conquering everybody in sight to help out in a border dispute is a terrible idea because they're going to help out by conquering you. This is exactly how, for example, the Roman Empire got so big, is they would go, oh, would you like some help? Great, and they conquer both of you. And that's actually how they came into Israel eventually, was the Hasmoneans, there we go, asked them in. Same thing here. Assyria is asked to help Judah. They just conquer Israel. And so you get the idea that Ahaz is not just terrible morally, he's actually just a terrible, unintelligent politician. And we get Hoshea. Hoshea, I can't say words. He's the last king of Israel. He's not as bad as the previous guys. They were vassals of Assyria. They were basically the same relationship that Herod had with Rome. You're your own country, but you don't do anything without the other countries saying it's okay. So he's a vassal to Assyria. But Hoshea, in some way, rebels. And so the king of Assyria, that's all the excuse he needs, comes in and attacks. Chapter 17 goes into great detail about how this is because of the sins of the people and following other gods, how this is actually a punishment on the Israelites, but it was also because they did terrible things. And this is kind of standard practice at the time. You partly depopulate the country. Some people you kill. A lot of people you just move out, and then you bring in people from other parts of your empire, people who are not culturally, maybe even linguistically the same, so that one, they're more loyal to you than the natives. Two, there's not a big group of people who are going to try and gang up on you. And so it's a very normal thing to just dilute the culture, but that means you end up diluting the religion as well, which obviously is a bad thing. But even then, even after everything Israel had done, even after all of this, God works for them. God sends lions to attack the settlers. Again, very unnatural behavior. And so the king of Assyria has to send a Yahweh priest back to show the people, the new people, how to worship God so that they hopefully don't get killed off by these lions. So now it's just Judah alone, and that's our next bit. And this goes into the Babylonian exile, and a lot of times it's just more of the same. We do get this one moment here of Hezekiah. Hezekiah is the king. There's an attack on Jerusalem. The city's under siege, and they're even talking to and asking Isaiah the prophet, what do we do? What do we do? And Hezekiah actually repents, and he actually prays, and he turns away from the Baals and from the idol worship. And there's actually enough to have deliverance from, at this point, I believe it's the Babylonians. And 185,000 troops just die in the night. And this is important because, I should have a map up here. If you think about how that part of the world is, there's one path from Babylon, Assyria, modern-day Iraq, down to modern-day Egypt, and that's through Israel. And so at this point, the Babylonians or the Neo-Assyrians, they're more or less interchangeable, and the Egyptians are in a conflict. And if you lose your big army right on Egypt's doorstep, Egypt's going to come conquer everything they can get a hold of. So the Babylonians have to retreat. They have to go back and get more troops. And so this is an enormous, enormous setback for them. And Hezekiah gets ill. He prays. Prophet comes, says, you get 15 more years of life. And he fleeces God, just like Gideon. I need a sign to make sure that the whole prophet and miracle thing is actually legit. And his shadow goes the wrong way 10 steps. And so, again, we get a call back to previous. We get the king Manasseh. Manasseh is awful. Manasseh put an Asherah pole in the temple, and he's terrible. It also cracks me up that he's Ephraim's brother in Israel, and extended pun there. We get Josiah. Josiah is kind of the other bright light in all of this, where he finds the book of the law just in a box in the temple, basically, cleaning out the attic. He reads it. He repents. They read it aloud. They renew the covenant with God. They even tear down those high places, the God places, but they let idolatry in. He even tears those down. He does the best of any king of Judah. And he gets a break. He gets a reprieve. But even that's not enough to turn away God's wrath because Manasseh was so bad. And then the Babylonians come in and they conquer Judah. And like I said, they basically just took over Assyria. They are more or less interchangeable. But it's the same pattern as Israel. Vassalage, then rebellion, then invasion, then conquest, and people get moved out, and other people get moved in. So that's how we get Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're people who are taken away. And we also have that very last king, Jehoiakim. He's taken hostage, he's taken prisoner, plus his whole family. They're taken over to Babylon. But the very last verses, the very last paragraph talks about, he's in prison, But one day he's let out, and he's taken to the king of Babylon's table and gets to eat there as an honored guest who is still in prison. But he's treated well. He's treated like a king. And he's treated that way for the next 6 years until he dies. So even with all of these terrible things that have happened, we end on that one bright note. There is going to be something, it's not all bad, that I think is important. So our lessons from this one is there's only one true God in the world. Elijah's last miracle, Elisha's miracles, all the interactions show that every time it's God versus other gods or God versus ourselves, relying on ourselves, God wins by a mile. And this is really, I think, shown with Elijah and the prophecies, and shown with Naaman. Naaman would have been willing to do a big thing. He would have been willing to do a lot himself for God to heal him. All he had to do is rely on God to heal him because God has all that power. And he talks about needing to show humility before God. This is the bears. This is Elijah and the groups of soldiers getting just nuked from orbit, basically, is if you are humble before God or his representative, then you're blessed. If you mock them, if you treat them poorly, bad things happen. And we can't have idols ahead of God. And this is always the story back and forth is whether or not they're worshiping Baal, whether or not worshiping Asherah, whether or not they're worshiping other gods, whether they're leaving those little outs, those high places. You've got to be actively working against all of your idols as soon as you see them, as soon as you realize they're there, or else they're going to sneak in, they're going to get you, and you'll be worshiping something else. Second lesson is that violating God's law will lead to judgment. We see this slow progression from David toward rejection of God and sin, and that is intended historically as an explanation of why the exile even happened. Because remember, as far as the Jews are concerned, we have the benefit, we know about Jesus. We know about Nehemiah and Ezra and coming back in the Second Temple. At the time, the story was, okay, bad things happened. We went to Egypt. God delivered us out of Egypt. We came to the Promised Land. We conquered the Promised Land. God was with us. And now all of that has been taken away. We don't own our own country. There's no temple. There's no ark. We have nothing as a people. And this is supposed to be the explanation for that. Wow, how did it go from so good to so bad? And it's because of their actions, of the people's violation of the covenant. And even when they repented, they didn't tear down the Baal altars, didn't tear down the Asherah poles. God demands complete and comprehensive and maximum effort to comply with the covenant. We can't do kind of a halfway job, because if we do, we're just doing what Jehu did. Yeah, we took care of some things. We left the rest of it there. But when the people did repent, those few moments it happens with Hezekiah and with Josiah and Joash, God blesses them. Didn't always mitigate the punishments, but he did always bless the people. And then God is going to fulfill his promises, even when we make it harder. In these books, we see the line of David's nearly wiped out twice. With Joash, we're down to one little boy who could have been killed and no one would know. But even then, things happen. Even then, David, generations ahead, had left weapons in the temple for soldiers who hadn't even been born yet to launch a coup against the queen. The kingdom gets invaded. It's destroyed as its own thing. But we know that the covenant's going to be fulfilled. And we see with, for example, that last king in that moment where, he gets to actually be, he's not just in jail. He's not just completely abandoned. God immediately will put into the world ways to fix or redeem the things that he is punishing. Even in the most extreme circumstances, we can trust in God. And we see that from the fulfillment of all of these prophecies. It's a little bit crazy when you think about it, the Jehu story. He shoots an arrow and kills the one guy at the one place that was prophesied. And then he goes to see Jezebel and her slaves, which were eunuchs. And the entire point of making somebody a eunuch slave is they have no other possible loyalties. They can't have kids. There's no children or family for them to worry about. They are almost always foreigners. They have no friends or family who are local. They should be completely devoted to their master, in this case, mistress. But those are the ones who threw her down. And within a couple hours, tops, the dogs had come and just devoured her body, had fulfilled the prophecy, which is, we think about outside the city square. There aren't that many wild dogs running around the middle of the city, unless you live in Seattle. That's a side note. And so, again, we see these very unusual things happening. But how does this point towards Jesus? First is that God will ultimately rescue his people. Sin is powerful. It is addicting and it's damaging. And we see that over and over again with Israel and with Judah and with the kings. They can't help themselves. Even the ones that try can't help themselves. It literally takes miracles to achieve salvation and deliverance. We have that miracle in Jesus. Normal people can't do that. And the other thing is that, is that part of that rescue will be a blessing to us. As the king goes, that's how the nation goes. So a good king means a good nation. A bad king means a bad nation. A perfect king, a holy king, means a perfect holy nation in the new Eden. The other thing is God always keeps his promises even when he's setting up the punishment. He's setting up the deliverance with it. So think about the Garden of Eden. Yes, you're punished. And Eve, your descendant, Jesus, will strike the serpent. The very moment bad things happen, the good's going to come with it. It's almost always baked into the bad or alongside of it. And just like with Naaman, God's only asking for simple things. He's not asking for big, showy, difficult things. You just have to promise to try harder and to follow that guy and not the bad guy, which is not hard. Okay, it's actually difficult, but it's not hard to do. And so it ends up being the situation where the problem is always going to be us. It's never going to be what God puts in front of us. And the way I put it in my notes, which I wish I'd gotten to directly, even as God is making it look farther away, he's already setting up how it's going to come true. And then, like I mentioned before, Jesus is the perfect king. There's this idea, especially if you read King Arthur stuff, of the Fisher King. As the king goes, so the land goes. Have you ever seen the movie Excalibur and the Carmina Burana bit where all the white blossoms? It's the same idea of if you have a perfect holy king, you're going to have a perfect holy kingdom. And that points directly at Jesus as our king, where it's hard. As we get to the end times, we get to Jesus not being just Savior, but truly taking kingship up, then we get this new Eden. And that's actually pointed out in a couple different places. In 2 Kings 2, 19 to 22, in chapter 4, 38 to 41, then 4, 1 through 7. These just keep being pointed out over and over again. And those few times we do actually see a good king, we get blessings. We get things going very, very well. And unfortunately, then people messed it up. The last thing is it shows our relationship with Jesus and with the Word. One of the fun things, and this definitely is the little brother energy coming out. One of the interesting things about me versus Andrew as a preacher is occasionally I go off on a wild hair because I'm up here and no one's going to tackle me, can't stop me. And so this one really jumped out at me. And I think it's a really, really useful analogy, but it does take a moment. So we have our kind of four groups of kings. We have David, who's like the good one, right? He had a couple of missteps, but David really is the good king. He's the man after God's own heart. Solomon started really well, and then it went downhill from there. Saul's pretty good. I mean, Saul definitely has some good things going for him, but you kind of get the idea he never really believed, or he definitely didn't go the distance. And he really feels to me in a lot of ways like our Josiahs, our Joashes, our Hezekiahs, our good kings from the kings. And we have our bad kings, our Ahabs, our Ahazes. They're really bad ones. They never really even bothered to look at God's law. And so we have David, followed the law, repented. we have Solomon. He made mistakes, but then he kept on with the mistakes, and he fell away. Saul, he looked good on the outside, but did he ever really believe? And think of him as being a cultural Christian. He followed the law because that's what was expected of him, not because, that's what was expected of him socially and culturally, not because it was something that he really believed in. And then the actively defying God's law. And we see a grouping of 4 people that matches this really closely in the parable of the sower. In the good soil, David, you hear the word, you understand it, you produce a huge crop. And yeah, you're going to make mistakes as a Christian. It happens. Repent, do your best, that's all you can do. Trust in God. Solomon, that's the seed among the thorns. It starts good, but then the worries of the life and the deceitfulness of wealth, that sounds like Solomon. They choke out the word and make you unfruitful. And that absolutely describes him. And then we get Saul. That's the rocky ground. When trouble or persecution becomes because of it, when you just really, really, really want to keep those cows, even though God said to destroy them because they're pretty good cows, well, you just kind of fall away. And the bad kings. Satan comes, the birds come, they just devour the word. And I think one of the things that Kings does, and Samuel does, for us as Christians to say, there's 4 whole books here of how to do it, and especially how not to do it. And it's a very, very good just survey of how to not screw up as we're living life today. And I think that's the last thing to take away is trying to be a David, trying to follow the examples of the good kings, in as much as they are good, and trying not to follow them as they're bad. Because we have a straight up, did this, good. He did that, bad. Good, bad. And we know immediately. It's a very, very useful primer. Next week, I wrote that down. So next week should be 1 Chronicles, which is a little bit different book talking about, but again, we're still in the history books. And so please join me in prayer. Lord God, thank you for this chance to dig into all the examples you gave us, to look at the very many ways that you've blessed us and have also shown us how to follow your covenant. Please be with us, help us to continue to be your people and stay focused on you. Amen. Please join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
I'd like to invite